They refused to pay and mocked the black single dad for rebuilding the ship. Then no captain dared sail it. The conference room went silent when Oliver McCall placed the invoice on the polished mahogany table. Vincent Hartwell leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk spreading across his face. "You actually think we're paying you this amount?" Vincent's voice dripped with amusement. "For what? Changing a few bolts and pretending you saved our ship?" Oliver said nothing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his Marine certification card. The room watched as he placed it deliberately beside the invoice. Then he pulled the ship's maintenance logbook from under his arm and set it down with a soft thud. "Without that signature," Oliver said quietly, pointing to the empty line on the final page. "No licensed captain in this port will take your vessel past the harbor mouth." Vincent's smirk faded. "That's blackmail." Oliver picked up his certification card and slid it back into his pocket. "No, that's maritime law. The logbook stays here. My signature doesn't." He turned and walked toward the door. "Wait, you're just going to walk away?" Vincent's voice rose. "We had an agreement." Oliver stopped at the threshold but didn't turn around. "We did. You agreed to pay for the work when it was completed. The work is completed. The payment isn't." The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Vincent grabbed his phone and dialed the first captain on his contact list. 20 minutes later, he was still making calls. Every single captain said the same thing. Not without McCall's certification. Not a chance. If you believe a man's word can be worth more than a company's contract, stay with us until the end. The rain had started 3 hours before Oliver McCall pulled his truck into the shipyard. The morning sky hung low and gray over the industrial docks, and the smell of salt water mixed with diesel fuel filled the air. His windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as he drove past rows of shipping containers stacked like building blocks. Oliver was 36 years old. His hands showed the years he had spent in engine rooms and cargo holds, working on vessels that moved goods across oceans. He had learned his trade on merchant ships, starting as a deckhand when he was 19 and working his way up through every certification the maritime industry required. His daughter Sophia had called him that morning before school. "Dad, did you get the job?" Her voice always carried hope, even when she was trying to sound casual. "I'm going to look at it today," he had told her. "We'll see what they need." She knew what that meant. It meant they needed the money. It meant the electric bill was 2 weeks overdue, and the landlord had started leaving messages. It meant her father would take the job even if it was twice as hard as they said it would be. The call had come from a man named Brian Foster, operations director for Hartwell Maritime Group. The company owned a fleet of cargo vessels that ran routes between Australia and Southeast Asia. One of their ships, the Pacific Horizon, had been sitting in dry dock for almost 3 months after an engine failure that no one seemed able to fix properly. "We've had 2 marine engineering firms look at it," Brian had said on the phone. "Both of them quoted us timelines we can't work with. We've got contracts that are bleeding money every day. That ship sits idle." "What kind of failure?" Oliver had asked. "Main propulsion system, fuel injection assembly, possibly electrical. The reports aren't clear." That should have been his first warning. Reports that weren't clear usually meant someone had started work they didn't finish, or didn't understand, or both. He parked his truck near the dry dock and stepped out into the rain. The Pacific Horizon sat in its cradle like a beached whale, hull streaked with rust and rain. It was a mid-size container ship, maybe 200 meters long, the kind built in the late 90s when fuel efficiency mattered less than cargo capacity. Brian Foster was waiting for him at the dock office. He wore a suit that looked expensive and a watch that confirmed it. He shook Oliver's hand with the firm grip of someone who had learned that gesture in a seminar. "Appreciate you coming out on short notice," Brian said. "Let me show you what we're dealing with." They walked up the gangway together. The deck was empty, except for some scattered equipment and a few tarps that hadn't been secured properly. Water pooled in the low spots. Brian led him down a series of narrow passages toward the engine room, talking the whole way. "The vessel's been out of service since June. We had Meridian Marine Engineering assess it first. They said 8 to 10 weeks minimum. We couldn't wait that long. Then Pacific Maritime Solutions gave us a quote that was double what we expected. So we're looking for someone who can move faster." Oliver stopped walking. "Who did the work that's already been done?" Brian hesitated. "We had an independent contractor start some preliminary repairs. He had to leave the project." "Why?" "Personal reasons." Oliver looked at him. "What kind of personal reasons?" "I don't have all the details," Brian said. "Look, I can get you the documentation we have. What I need to know is whether you can get this ship operational in 4 weeks. 4 weeks. We have a contract with a Malaysian distributor. If we don't deliver by the end of next month, we're looking at penalty clauses that could cost us more than the repairs." Oliver didn't respond immediately. He opened the engine room door and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Diesel and metal and something else, something that smelled like burned wiring. The main engine sat in the center of the space, a massive turbocharged diesel that should have been humming with power, but instead sat silent and cold. Panels had been removed and left leaning against the bulkheads. Tools were scattered on the deck plates. Wiring harnesses hung loose from their mounts. He pulled a flashlight from his belt and started walking the perimeter. It took him less than 5 minutes to find the first problem. A fuel injection pump had been removed and replaced with a unit that had a different serial number than what the ship's documentation called for. The mounting bolts were the wrong size. Someone had forced them. He moved to the electrical panel. Half the circuit breakers were labeled with tape and marker, handwritten notes that didn't match any schematic he had ever seen. He opened one of the junction boxes and found wires that had been spliced together with electrical tape instead of proper marine connectors. "This isn't preliminary repair work," Oliver said. "This is someone who didn't know what they were doing." Brian stepped closer. "Can you fix it?" Oliver closed the junction box. "I need to see every maintenance record you have for this vessel. Original specifications, service history, everything. I need to know what parts have been ordered and where they came from. And I need to know the name of the contractor who worked on this before me. His name was Lewis, Ray Lewis." Brian pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "I can have someone send you his reports." "I don't want his reports. I want to know if he's certified." "He said he was." "Said or showed you documentation?" Brian stopped scrolling. Oliver walked back to the main engine and knelt down beside the fuel system. He could already see 3 more components that had been installed incorrectly. This was going to take longer than 4 weeks. It was going to take longer than 8, and it was going to cost more than whatever number Brian had in his head. "If you want me to do this," Oliver said, "I need complete access, and I need final approval on every part that goes into this engine. No substitutions, no shortcuts, and I need 50% of my estimated cost up front." Brian's expression changed. "That's not how we usually structure these agreements." "Then find someone else." Oliver stood up and wiped his hands on his work pants. He had done this enough times to know when a job was going to be trouble, but he also knew what his bank account looked like. He knew Sophia needed new shoes, and the dentist had sent a second notice about her checkup. Brian put his phone away. "Let me make some calls. How much are we talking about?" Oliver walked around the engine room one more time, mentally cataloging every system that needed attention. He thought about the electrical panel and the fuel injection assembly and the wiring harnesses. He thought about the parts he would need to order and the time it would take to verify that each one was legitimate and properly certified. 240,000, he said. Australian dollars. Parts and labor. That's if I don't find anything else once I start pulling this apart. Brian went very still. That's 3 times what Lewis quoted us. And how much of Lewis's work are you planning to use? Brian didn't answer. Oliver headed for the door. I'll send you a written estimate by tomorrow. You can take it or leave it. But if you take it, we do this the right way, or we don't do it at all. He was halfway up the gangway when Brian called after him. Wait, let me talk to the ownership group. Give me until end of business today. Oliver stopped and turned around. End of business today. After that, I've got other work to consider. He didn't, really, but Brian didn't need to know that. The drive home took 40 minutes. Oliver called Sophia from the truck. How did it go? She asked. They're thinking about it, he said. Should know by tonight. Is it a good job? He looked out at the rain streaming across his windshield. It's a big job. That's different from good. She laughed. That's very dad of you to say. How was school? Fine. We had a quiz in math. I think I did okay. Just okay? Better than okay, but I didn't want to brag. He smiled. You're allowed to brag to me. They talked for a few more minutes before she had to go. Oliver sat in the truck after they hung up, watching the rain and thinking about the engine room and the work ahead. His phone buzzed at 4:30. It was an email from Brian Foster. 3 attachments: contract proposal, parts authorization form, and a payment schedule. The payment schedule showed 25% upfront, 25% at midpoint, and 50% on completion. Oliver read it twice, then called the number at the bottom of the email. We agreed on 50% upfront, he said when Brian answered. The ownership group wouldn't approve that, Brian said. This is standard for all our contractor agreements. Then we don't have an agreement. Oliver, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm asking for half the money before I put in half the work. What you're asking me to do is front you $120,000 in parts and labor on the promise that you'll pay me later. We're a reputable company. So was Ray Lewis, apparently. There was a long silence on the line. Let me go back to them, Brian finally said. You do that. Oliver ended the call. He sat in the truck and waited. The rain kept falling. His phone rang again at 6:15. 40% up front, Brian said. That's as high as they'll go. Oliver closed his eyes and did the math. $96,000. It would cover most of the parts he needed and give him enough to keep the bills paid while he worked. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was probably the best he was going to get. All right, he said. Send me the revised contract. I'll have it to you in an hour. When can you start? Soon as the money clears. He hung up and sat in the silence of his truck. Somewhere in his gut, something told him this was a mistake. But mistakes were a luxury he couldn't afford right now. If you've ever had to choose between what's right and what's necessary, you know exactly how Oliver felt in that moment. Stay with us. Oliver started work on the Pacific Horizon 3 days later. Oliver brought in two people he trusted. The first was Raymond Torres, an electrical systems specialist who had worked alongside Oliver on container ships for almost 15 years. The second was a young marine engineer named Eliza Chen, fresh from her certifications, but sharp enough to spot problems most veterans would miss. They started by stripping out everything Ray Lewis had installed. Every pump, every wire, every connector that didn't match the original specifications. It took them 6 days just to remove the unauthorized modifications. "This is worse than I thought," Raymond said on the second week. He was standing beside the main electrical panel with a multimeter in his hand. "Half these circuits are running on the wrong voltage. If they had tried to start this engine under load, it would have caught fire." Oliver photographed everything. Every mismatched part, every improper installation, every component that carried no legitimate certification number. He documented it the way his first mentor had taught him, 23 years ago on a freight ship in the Tasman Sea. If you can't prove it, you can't stand behind it. The parts started arriving in the third week. Oliver inspected every delivery personally. Fuel injectors from a certified supplier in Singapore. Wiring harnesses manufactured to the exact specifications in the original ship documentation. A replacement alternator that cost $11,000 but came with a serial number he could trace back to the foundry. Brian Foster showed up at the dock every few days, always with questions about timeline. "Where are we on the schedule?" he would ask. "We're where we are," Oliver would say. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." On the 18th day, Eliza found something that made her stop working and call Oliver over immediately. "Look at this," she said. She was pointing to a valve assembly deep in the fuel system. The serial number. Oliver climbed down beside her and looked. The number had been filed off and re-stamped. Someone had taken a rejected component, altered its identification, and installed it anyway. "Pull it," he said. "Document everything before you touch it." "That's going to add 3 more days," Eliza said. "Then it adds 3 more days." Brian was less understanding when Oliver called him that evening. "You're already a week behind the estimate you gave us," Brian said. "Now you're telling me you need to replace another component that wasn't even on the original list? I'm telling you someone installed counterfeit parts in your engine," Oliver said. "If that valve fails at sea, your ship loses fuel pressure. You know what happens then? We can't keep extending this timeline. You want me to sign off on a ship that's not seaworthy? I want you to do the job we're paying you for." Oliver looked at the phone. Then he looked at the maintenance logbook sitting open on his work table. "That's exactly what I'm doing." He hung up before Brian could respond. The work continued. Oliver spent 19-hour days in the engine room, coming home only to sleep and check on Sophia. She would be at the kitchen table doing homework, and he would sit with her for 20 minutes before exhaustion pulled him toward bed. "You look tired, Dad," she said one night. "Big project," he told her. "Is it going okay?" "It's going." "That's very dad of you to say," she smiled. He smiled back. "Where did you learn to be so smart?" "I had a good teacher." On day 27, they fired the engine for the first time. Raymond stood at the electrical panel, watching gauges. Eliza monitored the fuel pressure. Oliver had his hand on the throttle control. "Ready?" he called out. "Ready," Raymond said. The engine turned over once, twice. Then it caught with a deep rumble that vibrated through the deck plates. Oliver watched the temperature gauges climb slowly into normal range. The fuel pressure held steady. Every electrical system showed green. They ran it for 40 minutes, gradually increasing the load. Everything held. When Oliver finally shut it down, Raymond was grinning. "That's a good sound," he said. "That's the sound of work done right," Oliver replied. He submitted his completion report the next morning, along with the final invoice. The total came to $268,000. The additional cost came from the counterfeit parts he had to replace and the extra materials needed to fix Ray Lewis's mistakes. Brian called within an hour. "This is $30,000 more than your estimate," he said. "Read the documentation," Oliver said. "Every additional expense is itemized and photographed. This isn't what we agreed to. We agreed I would make the ship seaworthy. That's what I did." There was a long pause. "I need to take this to the ownership group." "You do that," Oliver said. "In the meantime, I'll be waiting for payment." 3 days passed, then 5. Oliver called twice and got voicemail both times. On the 6th day, he drove to the Hartwell Maritime offices downtown. The receptionist told him Brian was in a meeting. Oliver said he would wait. He sat in the lobby for 2 hours until Brian finally appeared. "Oliver, I wasn't expecting you. You haven't been returning my calls. I've been in discussions with the executive team about your invoice. What's there to discuss?" Brian glanced at the receptionist, then gestured toward a conference room. "Let's talk in here." They sat down at a table designed for a dozen people. Brian folded his hands in front of him. "The ownership group has some concerns," he said, "about the additional charges, about the timeline, about some of the decisions you made without prior authorization. Every decision I made is documented in the daily reports I sent you, reports we didn't always agree with. You don't have to agree with them. You have to pay for them." Brian's expression hardened. "Here's the situation. We're prepared to pay you the original estimate, $240,000. The additional charges, we're disputing. On what grounds? On the grounds that you exceeded the scope of work without approval. I found counterfeit parts in your engine. What did you want me to do? Leave them there? We would have wanted you to consult with us before making expensive replacements." Oliver stood up. "Where's the logbook?" "What?" "The ship's maintenance logbook. Where is it?" "It's still on the vessel." "Good. It stays there. Until I receive full payment, that logbook doesn't get my signature." Brian stood up too. "That's not how this works." "That's exactly how this works. Maritime law requires a certified engineer to sign off on all major repairs before a vessel can be cleared for departure. No signature, no clearance. You can't hold our ship hostage." "I'm not holding anything hostage. I'm following the same regulations that keep ships from sinking. You want to sail without certification? Go ahead. Find a captain willing to take that risk." Oliver walked out of the conference room. He was in his truck when his phone rang. It was Brian. "We can discuss this," Brian said. "There's nothing to discuss. You owe me $268,000. When I receive it, you get your signature. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." He drove home. Sophia was at a friend's house. The apartment was quiet. Oliver sat at the kitchen table and looked at the bills stacked in the corner. The electric company had sent a final notice. The landlord wanted last month's rent plus this month's. His truck registration was 2 months overdue. His phone rang again. Different number this time. He answered, "Mr. McCall? This is Vincent Hartwell. I own Hartwell Maritime Group. I understand we have a disagreement." "We have an unpaid invoice," Oliver said. "I've reviewed the situation with my team. We're prepared to offer you $250,000 as a final settlement." You sign the logbook, we pay you, everyone moves on. The invoice is for 268,000. Mr. McCall. Vincent's voice carried the tone of someone used to getting his way. You're a small, independent contractor. We're a company with legal resources you can't match. I'm offering you a fair compromise. Fair would be paying what you owe. You're in debt, Vincent said. I know about your financial situation. The bank notices. The overdue bills. You really want to drag this out? Oliver felt his hand tighten on the phone. How do you know about my finances? I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. Look, take the 250. Sign the paperwork. This doesn't have to get ugly. Oliver hung up. He sat in the silence of his kitchen. Then he picked up the phone again and made a different call. Captain Werner's voice was exactly as Oliver remembered it. Gruff, direct, with a German accent that 30 years in Australia hadn't softened. Oliver McCall, I thought you retired from ship work. I thought so too, Oliver said. I need to ask you something. He explained the situation, the Pacific Horizon, the repairs, the payment dispute. Werner listened without interrupting. When Oliver finished, the old captain was quiet for a moment. You did the propulsion system? He finally asked. Complete overhaul, fuel injection, electrical, everything. And they want you to certify it without paying you? That's the situation. Then they can want all they like, Werner said. I wouldn't sail that ship on Lewis's work if you paid me double. If you fixed it proper, your name goes in that logbook, or the ship stays in dock. Thanks, Captain. Oliver, you did right. Don't let them tell you different. Over the next 2 days, Oliver called every licensed captain he knew in Port Adelaide. Some he had worked with. Some he had only met in passing. He explained the situation each time, simply and clearly. They all said the same thing. Not without certification, not a chance. On the 3rd day, Brian called. We have a problem, he said. His voice was different now, tighter. What's that? We can't find a captain willing to take the Pacific Horizon out. Oliver said nothing. Every single one asks about your signature. That's me protecting my reputation. Any captain worth his license knows better than to sail on uncertified repairs. Vincent wants to meet with you, in person. I'm available, Oliver said. They met the next morning. Same conference room. Vincent Hartwell sat at the head of the table with Brian beside him. 2 other men in suits sat along the sides. Lawyers. Probably. Oliver sat down across from them. Mr. McCall, Vincent began, it seems we've reached an impasse. You reached an impasse when you decided not to pay your bills, Oliver said. One of the lawyers leaned forward. Mr. McCall, you should know that we're prepared to pursue legal action for contract interference and business disruption. Pursue whatever you want, Oliver said. Won't change maritime law. Vincent raised a hand, silencing the lawyer. Let's be clear about what's happening here. You've made it impossible for us to operate our vessel. That's costing us money every day. You made it impossible when you hired someone who installed counterfeit parts, Oliver said. I'm just the one who found them. We dispute that characterization. Oliver pulled a folder from his bag. Inside were photographs, part numbers, documentation. He spread them across the table. This valve assembly, he said, pointing to one photo. Serial number filed off and re-stamped. This fuel injector. Wrong specifications for the engine type. This wiring harness. Not rated for marine use. You want to dispute it? Show this to any certified marine engineer and ask them if they would sign off on it. Vincent looked at the photographs. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "How much?" he asked quietly. 268,000. Same as the invoice. Vincent looked at Brian. Brian looked at the table. "If we pay this," Vincent said, "you sign the logbook today." "I sign it when the money clears," Oliver said. "Not before. That could take days." "Then you wait days." One of the lawyers started to object, but Vincent cut him off with a gesture. "Fine," Vincent said. "You'll have a wire transfer by end of business today. You sign tomorrow morning." Oliver gathered his photographs and put them back in the folder. "When the money's in my account, I'll be at the dock at 8 a.m. He stood up and walked to the door. "Mr. McCall," Vincent called after him. Oliver turned. "This isn't personal," Vincent said. "It's business." Oliver looked at him. "For you, maybe." The money arrived at 4:30 that afternoon. Oliver checked his account 3 times to make sure it was real. $268,000. Australian. He paid the electric bill that night, and the rent, and the truck registration. He put aside money for Sophia's dentist and her new shoes. The rest went into savings. The next morning, he drove to the shipyard. Brian was waiting at the dock with the maintenance logbook. Raymond and Eliza came with Oliver. They climbed aboard the Pacific Horizon together. Oliver opened the logbook to the final page. He read through the work summary one more time. Then he signed his name in the certification line and dated it. "There," he said, handing the logbook to Brian. "She's seaworthy." Brian took the logbook without a word and walked away. Captain Werner was scheduled to take the Pacific Horizon out on her first voyage the following week. He called Oliver tonight before departure. "I reviewed your work," Werner said. "Good job. Clean. Proper." "Thanks, Captain." "I told Vincent he got lucky. He had no idea what Lewis had done to that ship. You probably saved lives. Just did what needed doing. That's why your signature means something, Oliver. Don't forget that." The Pacific Horizon sailed on schedule. She made it to Malaysia and back without incident. Oliver heard later that Vincent had fired Brian and launched an investigation into how Ray Lewis had been hired in the first place. 3 months later, Oliver got a call from a shipping company in Sydney. They had a vessel that needed engine work. They had heard his name from Captain Werner. The jobs kept coming after that. Word travels fast in maritime circles, especially when it's about someone who does things right. Sophia got her new shoes and her dentist appointment. Oliver caught up on every bill and started putting money away for her college fund. One evening, she asked him about the Pacific Horizon job. "Was it worth it, Dad? All that trouble?" Oliver thought about Vincent's offer, the pressure, the threats, the days he wasn't sure if he had made the right choice. "Yeah," he said, "it was worth it." "Why?" "Because some things matter more than getting paid on time, like being able to sleep at night, like knowing your name means something." She smiled. "That's very Dad of you to say." He smiled back. "Where did you learn to be so smart?" "I had a good teacher." 6 months after the Pacific Horizon sailed, Oliver received a letter. It was from Vincent Hartwell. Inside was a check for $20,000 and a short note, "Additional payment for work rendered. We've since discovered the extent of the previous contractor's negligence. Your thoroughness prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure. Thank you." Oliver deposited the check. Then he took Sophia out for dinner at the place she had been asking about for months. They sat across from each other in a booth by the window. "What are we celebrating?" she asked. "Nothing specific," he said. "Just a good day." She looked at him. "You did something right, didn't you?" "I tried to." "That's all anyone can do," she said. Oliver looked at his daughter and realized she understood more than he had given her credit for. She had watched him struggle, watched him choose the harder path when easier ones were available, watched him refuse to compromise when compromise would have been simpler. "Yeah," he said, "that's all anyone can do." Outside, the evening sun caught the edge of the harbor, turning the water gold. Ships moved slowly toward the horizon, carrying their cargo to distant ports. Each one certified, each one safe, each one signed off by people who understood that their names meant something. Oliver watched them go and knew he had made the right choice. Every single time.